welcome everybody to the Good Guys and Men in the Mix special judicial edition. I am Nicolette Zachary. I'm the president of the National Conference of Women's Bar Associations, and we are hosting this event together in partnership with the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession and the ABA Young Lawyers Division. Very excited to be able to bring you this virtual program today on braving and deconstructing bias, the rewards of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as our panel of judges and justice today. Not going to spend too much time with my remarks. I'm going to turn this over to Teresa Beck, who is our Vice President of Fundraising and Strategic Partnering and the co-chair and one of the major driving, if not the major driving force behind our Good Guys program. Teresa.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to start sharing my screen to show you this presentation, very short, which we're calling a Good Guys brief. And give me 1 second. There we go. Oh. Okay, well, welcome to the program today. This is Good Guys Judicial Edition and Men in the Mix. For those of you that don't know, Men in the Mix is a program of the ABA's Commission on the Status of Women in the Profession that has been doing studies about how to make sure that our male colleagues know that they're invited and necessary in this conversation. And they're actually releasing a report on March 1st, which we're really anxious to see. So look for that. This is a brief summary of what we're going to do today, a quick briefing. Sheryl Axelrod, owner of the Axelrod firm, is going to do her presentation. And then we have these amazing panelists, Justice Goodwin Liu from the California Supreme Court, Captain John Stevens with the Navy Marine Corps Trial Judiciary, Judge Timothy Kenny, Chief Judge Timothy Kenny from the Wayne County Circuit Court in Michigan, and of course, Judge Peter Reyes, also with the Commission on Women and with the Minnesota Court of Appeals. And we're very grateful to all of them for being here today. Quick background about Good Guys and where it came from. Good Guys is a program of the National Conference of Women's Bar Associations, and we are very grateful to the National Diversity Council for helping to create our logo. Sorry, I went away from that a little too quick. So National Diversity Council, if you haven't heard of it before, is a national organization with state and local organizations throughout the country. And we're very grateful to them for our logo, which has always represented us really well. I want to tell you a little bit about the National Conference of Women's Bar Associations and where it came from, because that helps explain the program. The National Conference of Women's Bar Associations has member organizations all over the country. If you happen to be in one of those states where you don't see a star, we would love for you to join us, especially. And if your organization isn't a member, let us know. But what we do is we convene women bar organizations all over the country. We have 2 national leadership events every year. We do virtual membership meetings, webinars with national leaders, with authors, key national programs like Good Guys for members to replicate, as well as one called Food from the Bar and others. We give out awards, we showcase key member programs. If you are a law school student organization or know of one, they can join for free. And we want to be sure that no women's law groups are left behind. So that's what we do. And in collaborating with women bar leaders all over the country over the past several years, what we've realized is that diversity initiatives are really failing, change is stagnant, and so something needs to change. We noticed that guys in leadership are often missing from the conversation, and they're missing, therefore, from the solutions. And so Good Guys was created to change that. We tried all these different things, and some of these you may remember, may still be involved in, but studies show that these things really aren't working to change the numbers. And we also know from the pandemic that women in particularly are being hard hit by the challenges of working with COVID. So the National Association of Women Lawyers did a study, and in 2015, they estimated that it wouldn't be until the year 2181 that women equity partners would reach 30%, not 50, but 30%. And that's just kind of one sign of the lack of the progress of women in the profession. So we felt like this is too long to wait. And we want to get something done before 2181, and we want to do better than 30% as female equity partners if we can. And so that's where Good Guys comes from. Good Guys is our program to bring men into the conversation. We are inviting you to our table. We want to share our perspective with good guys, guys overcoming obstacles to diversity. We want to showcase those good guys, like the gentlemen that are on the panel today, include them, much like we want to be included in their efforts. We want to include them in ours. And we think that working together, we can really have exponentially stronger impact than if good guys aren't involved in these issues. We also provide information about the financial benefits of diversity and how to disrupt bias right now, which you're going to hear from Sheryl Axelrod. We have a toolkit. I'm going through this really fast, so hopefully not talking too fast, but you can find it at goodguysinlaw.com. Good Guys has had programs all over the country. I think I can virtually add Chicago since we were supposed to be in Chicago for the ABA Midyear meeting, so maybe we attribute this program to Chicago. We also recently did programs in Birmingham and London. So Good Guys has actually become international, and we're hoping to do Good Guys Canada soon as well. So keep in touch so we can share with you the plans. And now I am going to turn it over to Sheryl Axelrod.
Thank you. I am trying to share screen real quick.
There you go.
All right. Do you see my screen now? I'm just checking.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So thank you, everybody, for joining this conversation. I've got a lot to get through. I'm going to introduce myself quickly and then go through my slides and the conversation about this subject, braving and deconstructing bias, the rewards of equity, equality, diversity, and inclusion. So quickly, who am I? And I like to talk about this for a minute because I think it grounds the conversation and explains perhaps why this interests me. So I'm one of 8 kids. I have 2 slow learning brothers. I'm careful in choosing my words when I talk about them because I hear people using words like that's so retarded. And for someone like me, that's very painful to hear that kind of language when I have people that I care about who worked really hard in school. So I'm Jewish as well. I'm a woman, and my to-be ex-husband is a Mexican-American, and our daughter, and he still remains one of my closest friends, and my daughter, our daughter, is a Jewish Latina. So like Teresa, I see diversity through multiple lenses. I graduated from Brandeis. I was an economics major. I graduated cum laude, and I look at diversity through that lens of economics. And I was always looking at questions like, how can we do things better and more efficiently and enhance organizations? And that's what you'll hear about in what I talk about on the subject. I met Teresa through the American Bar Association. I served on the President's Gender Equity Task Force, and I went to ABA meetings and met her there. I'm a former president of the Temple Law Alumni Association, founded our Women's Initiative and our Diversity Committee. Sadly, in Pennsylvania, we do not have a Women's Bar Association. I never knew that these things existed before I met Teresa. I am the winner of the NAM Wolf, National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms Advocacy Award. NAM Wolf is for firms like mine that are women or minority owned or both, except that it's not just for firms like that. It's for firms like that that represent companies. And you normally have to have major companies, at least 3, that rave about you before you can become a member. So I like to say that we're the best of the best women and minority owned firms in the country handling defense work. We do at my firm, the Axelrod firm, We represent companies in their commercial employment and bodily injury cases. I serve as a judge, oftentimes myself, like the judges here, but I help, I serve as a settlement master, helping parties resolve their cases, and as a discovery master. And in terms of the 2181, I just have to say one quick thing, that I wrote an article that was the cover story of the National Association of Women Lawyers magazine, really arguing that there's something changing that timeline, and actually I think moving it way up, and that is women and minority owned firms, I think, are disrupting that in a very positive way. So let me get to the presentation here about braving and deconstructing bias. So I want to start with talking about what unconscious bias and confirmation bias are, then go to the scope of the damage that we have at play here, the profitability of diversity, which is what got me interested in all of this. I was an economics major, as I said, so I look at that, everything through that kind of lens. And then tools we can all use to disrupt bias, make a positive difference, which is hopefully why everyone is here, is for those kinds of things. So what is unconscious bias? So for those who don't know, it's one way you could call it is stereotypes. Another way of discussing it is to say that these are the preconceived ideas that we hold about people based on such things as their gender or their race. And confirmation bias is what happens when we seek evidence to confirm our unconscious bias. And I'm going to talk about that through an example so you'll really understand what it means. So some examples of unconscious bias, people say, I don't think it really exists, or I don't believe in it. It's been a proven fact through studies. So for instance, there's studies on lab managers, and you would think that scientists would be the most well-equipped people to minimize bias, because their whole course of study is about looking at actual data and acting according to what the data tells them, having a hypothesis, running tests, and then following the data to the results. But unfortunately, scientists, even top scientists, will have their unconscious biases impact the way that they view people. And when they were looking at who should be a lab manager, and they were looking at identical resumes of men and women, they thought that the men were more competent, more likely, they would be more likely to hire them. And they thought that they should get a higher salary and were worth spending more time mentoring. Female scientists had as much likelihood of having these same biases as males. Why? Because we all grew up in the same world in which women were so disproportionately not seen as lab managers and scientists. And so they also thought that they didn't belong there. When we have orchestra auditions, our orchestras are getting far more gender equal, gender balanced as a result of blind auditions. Orchestras were overwhelmingly white and male before blind auditions. There are much more women on orchestras now. It's still very much more white because of socioeconomic inequality among people of color, who therefore will have less access to orchestra, being able to practice, having the equipment, all of it that's necessary, but to play in the orchestras. But when you had the screens and people auditioned, we have now more women because people didn't see who was auditioning. We actually had to fix how they were auditioning, because when they would walk across to their seat and you would hear the clicking of their heels, that was enough to trigger the unconscious bias. So they started having the auditions with the women wearing socks, and that's what changed everything. Venture capital is horrible in terms of how much money is given to women-owned businesses like my firm and other women-owned businesses. Very, very little, almost no venture capital goes to startup businesses that are women-owned. And it's so bad that at this point, many women-owned businesses have a man who will make the plea for the funds because they know that they're more likely to get them that way. Even though women are more reluctant to start a business and generally do better in terms of they're more likely to succeed if they actually step out and do it, still more money is given to male-owned businesses. We see in job applications, racial bias to an extraordinary extent, so that for every 10 resumes, a white name sounding, a person with a white sounding name on a resume, for every 10 resumes they send out, they'll get a call back. But it takes 1.5 times that, 15 resumes, for someone with a African-American sounding name to get a call back. And those are, by the way, with identical resumes. And we don't just prefer men, but we prefer tall white men. And if you look at these statistics that I have on the screen, this is about our CEOs. And even though only 14% of the population of men is 6 foot tall or taller, and only 3.9% of men in the United States are 6.2 or 6'2" or taller, we see that 58% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are white, they're male, and they're 6 foot tall or taller. And 30% of them are 6'2" or taller and white and male. So this is a huge bias at play. There's no data to support any notion that white males who are 6 foot tall or taller are any better equipped to be CEOs than anyone else. I told you I would give you an example of confirmation bias. So this is a fantastic study. It was such a smart thing to do. So a group of people put together a memo and intentionally put mistakes in it, including mistakes of analysis. This was a legal memo. The cover sheet of the memo identified the writer of 60 of these memoranda, completely identical, to be John Thomas, a third-year associate with a degree from NYU. And it was sent to 60 partners. And half of them had a cover sheet that identified John Thomas as white. Half had a cover sheet that identified him as African-American. Well, confirmation bias, the idea that people thought that if the person was Black, that he would be less competent, led partners to view the John Thomas they believed to be Black far worse than the John Thomas they believed to be white, writing the identical memo. And in fact, the partners who thought John Thomas was Black found far more errors in the memo than those who thought he was white. They rated him worse, and they had far worse things to say about John Thomas when they thought he was Black, like, I can't believe he graduated from NYU. So this is a really important study for us to check our biases, which against people of color when it comes to competency. Like the lab manager hypothetical, where women were just as likely to find women less worthy of mentoring, getting more pay, et cetera. Black partners were just as likely as white partners to negatively evaluate the John Thomas that they thought was Black. Again, we all grew up in the same environment, getting the same unconscious bias built in to our thinking as a result of who we're seeing in leadership, who we're seeing as partners, for instance, at law firms, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male. All right, so what are the biases? As many women can attest, the bias is that we are overly aggressive. We can say the exact same things as men, but we're heard as more aggressive when we do. I'm not going to play this ABC News experiment, but I do recommend that you watch it. It's a man and a woman interviewing for a job. They're trained actors. They're saying the exact same thing, but people who hear this overwhelmingly, I put it on LinkedIn in a group that has 1 million people in it. And everyone that was responding was telling me either the woman was so overly confident as to be obnoxious, or she was too meek. The exact same woman, was viewed both ways. So it's a Goldilocks syndrome where most women cannot be viewed as neither obnoxious and overly aggressive or too meek and just right. It's very, very unlikely that women are viewed that way. Overwhelmingly, they're viewed one way or the other. The bias against people of color is as reflected in the Written in Black and White study, which is that people of color are less competent, even when they perform equally well, and certainly when they perform better than their white male counterparts. They're viewed with a lot of skepticism, the same way women are when we try to rise, viewed with a lot of skepticism. We women face it as overly aggressive. People of color are facing it on alleged competency grounds, and both are viewed as not trustworthy. So this is impacting reviews. Women, when in a study of 248 people, women were given, when they were given critical reviews, over 75% of the time, they were told things like, watch your tone, step back, stop being so judgmental, all these kinds of language around aggression. When men got negative reviews, they were only told anything negative about being overly aggressive 2% of the time, 2 versus over 75% of the time, huge disparities there. We also see bias impacting business generation, business inheritance. The reason that this is happening is because there is nothing disrupting the bias. In other words, in most firms, in most places where women and people of color can inherit business from other people, it's either happening or not happening without any input by the firm, without any disruption of the fact that most of the people who hold business in law firms across the country are white and male, and they inherited it from other white men before them. And there's actually a study, Sky Analytics, that did a big data study that shows the great extent to which this is impacting law firms. And most business is inherited. So this is one of the primary ways in which women are held back from advancement in law firms. Another key way is that women are billed at lower rates than men. And Sky Analytics was also seeing this happening as well. So for every hour that the woman is getting billed at a lower rate at the end of the year, when she's looking at how much she brought in her firm versus a man, even if she spent as many hours as he did, she will actually be credited for less because she was billed out for less. Even though, as Sky Analytics found, she was no less efficient, women were no less efficient, there was no good reason, and you can look at it through all the data, there was no reason other than bias that would seem to support this kind of practice, which is widespread. So we can all test for the biases that we have, and I recommend everybody do so. You can go to Harvard's Project Implicit, Google Harvard Project Implicit, you'll find it. You can test yourself for gender bias, racial bias, and other kinds of biases, and you'll find that you have it. The good news about doing that then is you can start to check yourself against your biases. Becoming aware of them is the first step. And then you can ask yourself, when a woman speaks and you're thinking she's too aggressive, you can think, boy, I remember Sheryl talking about that. And she said that women are heard as more aggressive than men. Would I think the same way of her if she were a man? Similarly, when you are looking at work product of any kind, and it's someone of color's work product, check yourself if you're starting to see errors. Would I look so carefully at this? Would I be looking at this the same way if this person were white? Would I be having the same questions that I'm having? Check your biases because they're going to be there. So why do we have these biases? I talked about the world we all grew up in. We've been so disenfranchised. What am I talking about? What does that mean? Well, we've become so disenfranchised. We are so disenfranchised that we've become actually socialized to the environment that we live in. And I want to show you what that environment looks like because it's really stunning, the disenfranchisement of women and people of color in particular, and also religious minorities and other minorities. So other historically underrepresented groups. When I say minorities, I'm trying to get a lot of data across in a short amount of time. What I do mean is people from historically underrepresented groups. So if you look at our executive branch, I'm going to talk about power in our country and who holds power and the disenfranchisement of women and other historically underrepresented groups from that. Look at our presidents. We have never had a woman president. That is striking for so many other developed countries. We have only had one vice president who is a woman, one president of color, and one vice president of color. The first woman vice president and the first person of color vice president is the same person, Kamala Harris, and we had President Barack Obama. That is it in terms of the diversity of our presidents. So no female ever head of state and only one vice president. If we were at equality, we would be looking at a country that has about half women, half men heads of state. We're nowhere near that. Nowhere, we're miles and miles from that. If we look at our statewide executive positions, women hold about 30% of those positions. So we're a little over 50% of the population of the country, and yet we're only 30%, so that's 50%, we're only 30% of the executive positions in state governments. So very far away from equality. In the legislative positions, same thing, about 30% are held by women of those positions. And this graphic, I think, is so striking. There's a couple graphics I want to tell you, a couple slides that to me stand out so much. This is one of them. Because if you notice, we see across our Congress, the United States Congress, that men represent 72% of our Congress, 72% of our Congress is white, and 72% of our Congress is Christian Protestant. So what does that mean? Well, women should be half the Congress because we're half the population, which may be even a little bit over that, since we're a little over 50%. So instead of at 50%, we have about half of that, 27.8% women in Congress. People of color represent about 40% of the population, but they're only about 28% of the people in Congress. Very, very poor representation of women and people of color. And as you see, the minority religious groups all combined only represent 28% of our legislators. So very, very, very poor representation. And these are the people who are supposed to represent us. They don't look like us. So if you look at our Supreme Court, this is a judicial edition, so I thought I'd take a nice look at the court. Our Supreme Court, women are outnumbered 2-1, 3 women, 6 men. If you look at racial minorities, whites outnumber people of color by a factor of 3.5 to 1. So we have some work to do. If you look at our federal bench, the Article 3 judges, these are our numbers. So the first circle on the left side, 66% of our federal judges are male instead of about 50% and 50% female. We only have 34% female. And in terms of their race, we see that the judges are white on the federal bench, 73% of them are, instead of about 60 and maybe 40% people of color. All people of color are jammed into 27% of the rest of the judicial seats in the federal courts. If you look at companies, this is, I said there's a couple slides I really, really think are huge in terms of showing what's going on. This is one of these other slides that I think is really important. This is what's happening in corporate America. What is this showing? This is showing the squeezing out of women and people of color as you rise in corporations. If you look at the entry level, the first bar on the left, what you see is that white men only represent 36% of the entry levels, which is about right. That's about what they should represent. Men of color, 16%, white women, 31%, women of color, 17%. If we were at equality, that bar would be the same from left to right. But instead, what we see across corporate America is white men getting advanced and advanced and advanced and advanced in far greater numbers than women and people of color, and squeezing out women and people of color till you get to the far right bar, where white men have gone from 36% of the population of entry levels to 68% of the population at C-suite level, almost doubled. And women have been squeezed out, and women of color squeezed out. I mean, there are almost no women of color left after this. And men of color too, squeezed out. That's why I'm saying this is one of the most important slides, because you are seeing the impact of inequality here. And this is what we were looking to change, these kinds of results. Now, the impact of growing up in a society in which we were so greatly disenfranchised, women and other historically underrepresented groups, what it did is, one, it's conditioned us to our disenfranchisement. So those who looked at these data points and thought, I didn't really realize how few women there were in Congress, how few people of color there were in Congress, how few women and people of color there are in the C-suite, and what's happening as we transfer from entry level to the C-suite. All of that's our disenfranchisement has become something that we've been conditioned to. We internalize these biases that we have against women, that they shouldn't be self-possessive, that they should not be assertive, that if they are, they're overly aggressive, that they don't belong in leadership positions. And we view them as less trustworthy and less likable the more that women rise. And we internalize the very biases I talked about earlier against people of color for the same reason, because we're not seeing women and we are not seeing people of color at the top. So we don't expect to see them there. And when they start to rise up, we recoil and we think they don't belong there. And so we internalize these biases that people of color are less competent and that they don't belong in leadership positions. So I'm going to turn a page now and talk about one of the things that really excited me about the study of this kind of work is what would happen. I started asking myself, what would happen if this changed? If we actually lived in a world in which there was equality. So I started looking at the profitability of diversity, and it was sky high. So companies that actually are more diverse, where you have more women on their boards, they outperform the companies that have no women on their boards. And we're just talking generally about boards with 3 or more women at the top. But companies with the most women on their boards, they outperform those with the least by a factor of 42 to 66%. If you look at those who have at least 3 or more women on their boards, just 3 or more women, that's it. And those are the best performers. You can see through these slides, 46 to 84% better returns on their investments, better returns for those companies. If you look at racial equality and greater numbers of racial diversity in companies, you will find that companies with more ethnically diverse executive teams, they're 33% more likely to see better than average profits. Incredible, just stunning kind of results from having greater diversity. So this is my third kind of money slide. One of the, really want to key in on this. So I have to credit Karen Pollack, who's the general counsel of Transamerica, for posting about this like 2 days ago on LinkedIn. And I picked it up and I'm like, I have to add this to my presentation because it's so huge. So this is what would happen if we were at greater equality. If the gap between white men and everyone else were closed, the economic gap between white men and everyone else, this United States, this country would have $2.6 trillion more. That's what we're talking about. And I went in and figured out how much that is in terms of our GDP, our gross domestic product, our entire production of the entire country, over 12%. We would have over 12% more. What does that mean? Our standard of living would go up about 12%. We would also, if we had closed the gender gap, if we had closed the economic gap between Blacks and whites in this country 20 years ago, instead of doing this now, if we did it now, we'd get $2.6 trillion more in terms of our gross domestic product. If we had done it 20 years ago, instead of 2.6 trillion, we'd have $16 trillion more. So for everybody out there, that's 76% more, 76%, 3/4 more. Huge, huge, huge. That's what it is costing us, our lack of equality. The article talked about how it's like a floating, what is it? The floating tide, the rising tide lifts all boats. There we go. The rising tide lifts all boats. That is what is at play here. There's so much dialogue in the public sphere about keeping the amount of money that we fund our public schools, that we fund for education, that we fund for food and food stamps and the like. And meanwhile, really, if we did this, we would make so much more and do so much better off as a country. Okay. Diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams. That's why this is true. And diverse teams don't suffer from groupthink, which is one of the main reasons that you find that diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams, because they don't get stuck in groupthink and all not challenge each other. Instead, where you have diverse thinkers, they challenge each other, and then they do better because they work out their shortfalls. So this also means that diversity has a synergistic positive impact. How to explain that quickly? It means two things working together have a better impact than each one separately and adding them up. So for instance, if you were to smoke and be around asbestos, let's say smoking had a 30% chance of causing you lung cancer, and let's say asbestos had a 20%. So you would think if you're smoking and you're around lung cancer and you're smoking and you're around asbestos, you'd have a 30 plus 20, 50% chance, greater chance of getting lung cancer. In fact, there's a synergistic positive impact because they work, unfortunately, in concert, and they make it more likely that you'll get lung cancer. Diversity has a positive synergistic impact where each diverse member of your team is actually working together to create a greater positive good outcome. This is a graph that's just stunning that shows, if I could draw a line, it would go from the bottom left to the upper right. It goes in a positive up direction. What this is countries on the Global Competitive Index. And those who are more treating women more as equal and have a higher index score in terms of how they treat women, they have far greater global economic power and competitiveness and a higher standard of living. Now, if you look at them, they're the countries in Scandinavia, Iceland, Finland, in the Scandinavian countries, where they have a far greater standard of living than we do in the United States. We could have a far better one if we were treating each other as equals. And also we find that countries that do these kinds of things are wealthier, more prosperous, they have better educated populations, they're less corrupt, and they're happier. So these are all wonderful things that we could benefit from if we started implementing these kinds of things. So when women try to rise, I've heard a lot of things like, just negotiate for higher pay. Women aren't negotiating as much as they need to. Well, the problem with that is women are penalized. And that's why it's really important to think about the backlash women face when we're forced to negotiate. A better tool, and I'll be getting to it, is to have set salaries and not force women and people of color to negotiate. When it comes to what happens to women when we negotiate, we suffer a penalty that people don't want to work with us as much. Even when we do that, when men do seek higher pay, they do not face these kinds of things. When men ask for more money, people don't like it, but they don't want to stop working with them. Women have actually had job offers pulled for negotiating for higher pay. So the focus when it comes to women who are negotiating for higher pay, the focus seems to shift away from their competence and it goes toward their social skills. And based on the data that I was showing you earlier, she's going to be seen, the woman seeking higher pay, as more aggressive, too loud, needs to dial it down and tone it back. And all these things are very hurtful. So it's much better, again, to have kind of standard lock pay. That effect is not happening for men. So I'm going to show a little ad. We practiced this earlier, and I want to, it makes the point, a lot of the points that I've been trying to make in my presentation. It's a very quick, short little ad. So let's see if we can all hear it. I'll make it bigger. See, he's the boss. That's the man. Who's she? Bossy. He's persuasive. He's the man. Same position. She's pushy. Now this is representing the guy who's working when he's got a child at home. He's dedicated. She's selfish. Same thing. Look at him. He cleans himself up. He's smooth and she's vain. She's a show off. Okay. So just wanted to show you that went viral around the world. I think mainly because so many women related to the messages that ad was getting across. How we are seeing the exact same behavior when done by men versus done by women, especially in the workplace. So what can we do? I promised that I would give you tools for everyone to become diversity champions. So one of the tools is work with minority and women-owned law firms. Large law firms, by and large, are not treating women and other historically underrepresented groups as equals. And their numbers, in terms of the people who are partners, people who have equity, are generally abysmal. Whereas firms like mine have far greater diversity. And all of their leadership is diverse, because you're seeing, to be for instance, a member of NAMWOLF, you have to have 51% of the ownership has to be woman or minority or both. And you can search for us on the NAMWOLF website by practice area, city, state, all kinds of things. Similarly, look to work with women and minority lawyers for your settlement masters, discovery masters, your mediators, your receivers, your experts, and AAA arbitrators. I used to just say, work with us, but then I saw that people aren't really using all the ways that they can work with us. So I started writing these things out. It's not just settlement masters, it's also expert witnesses and arbitrators. Really think about who you know, or who other people that you work with know, who your client knows, etc., that may be a woman or person of color or both that you can work with. Make sure your vendors are women or minority owned businesses. Again, your expert witnesses, but also your court reporting companies, the companies you buy your paper and other supplies from. Support women and minority owned businesses. I think we are the best way to reach equality. And as I said earlier, I think we're the great disruptors that are going to make 2081 be a year far earlier than that, because we're going to have greater ownership in firms and treat people better. Frankly, a lot of my NAMWOLF member firms, like my own, we really cared about how we were treating our associates, and we've worked with each other, many of us, to develop different kinds of procedures for people to become partner, for people to advance, for pay, all sorts of things, because we didn't like or want in our firms the kind of treatment that we were seeing in the firms that we left. So look at pay. Remember, I said that it's unfair, frankly, to make women and people of color and other historically underrepresented groups to negotiate for pay, because they are going to face a backlash when they do. So I would recommend that we have pay be transparent, and that we pay everyone the same as their white male counterparts, and we audit pay to make sure that we do, that we set up fair and thoughtful systems for who inherits business. We audit reviews to eliminate bias and against women and against people of color. So we check for that, we audit it, and we make sure it doesn't happen, and we audit billing rates so that everyone's billing rate is fair and equal and not disproportionate. It should be based on their experience. We should look at the firm's processes for advancement, make sure that they're clear, and audit how they're applied to women and other historically underrepresented groups. Build unconscious bias training and sponsorship training into the firm's training programs and culture, so people understand how we expect at our firm women and people of color and other historically underrepresented groups to be treated. Make sure your firm's equity partners are diverse by gender and race. and other metrics so that you show that your firm in fact values diversity. Tie partner compensation to diversity and inclusion metrics. And I give some examples. How about those who retain and advance women and minorities be paid extra because of that good work? And those who are constantly losing women and other minorities, think about how you can penalize them. Because we know that oftentimes there are some people that are doing this again and again, not treating us equally, and people are leaving and not wanting to work with them. Look at the growth of your business in terms of being a leader in the space. Have a head of human resources that has a strategic role in it. Make talent management experience a qualification for this, and make sure every committee you have is tasked with making hiring and advancement for senior level roles fairly represented with diverse personnel, diverse people. Don't typecast women and people of color and other minorities into stereotypical roles. For instance, you're going to run the summer program, that kind of thing that take huge amounts of time and don't provide an upside financially to them. Okay, then I have 3 more: place, echo, and promote. I can leave them in the slide presentation for other people to view. I see Nicolette, you're back on, so.
Just getting ready.
Yeah, no worries. If I don't have any more time, that's fine. I can put the place, echo, and promote into the slides. What's that?
You're good.
Okay, a couple minutes to do it then?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll go through place, echo, promote. It's called PEP. I call it PEP so it's easy to remember. Place, echo, and promote are 3 tools I came up with based on the data that I provided that help you advance women and other people from historically underrepresented groups. Place. So when you see an opportunity for someone in a historically underrepresented group, place them in it. What does that mean? If there's a publication she or he should write in, a speaking engagement that would suit them, someone that they should meet, place them in it. Recommend them for those things. Place them. Echo them. This was called amplification in the Obama White House, and it was literally so powerful that it achieved gender equality among those in the president's inner circle of advisors. What is it? When you're in a group setting and someone makes a great comment, a woman or a person from a historically underrepresented group, raise your hand and echo it. Say, wow, Gianna Smith made a fabulous comment. Repeat the comment, assume that she never was heard because she probably was not. Then she gets all the credit for her great idea, and you've just elevated her among the group. That is a very powerful tool. And then promote women and those from historically underrepresented groups. You can promote them directly if you have the power to make them partner or elevate them to judgeship, etc. There are other ways too, is speak highly of them. Teresa was saying on our call before we started this program that is so important, just that positive kind of feedback said to others about the person from the historically underrepresented group is a tremendously powerful tool. So place, echo, and promote. This is my contact information and Teresa's, and I just want to thank everyone for the honor of being able to present at this, the other auspicious speakers that I can't wait to hear from.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Just before we move on, I just wanted to ask if you could, or I don't know if Teresa can do it or somebody asked for the links to the 2 videos, especially the first one that you weren't able to show. If you could drop them either in the Q&A or the chat for everyone, that would be great.
Will do.
Okay. So it's time for what we call our, somebody's also asking if the slides are available. And Cheryl, were you going to be sharing those?
I can do that. If NCWBA will help me, maybe what we could do is send it to all of the attendees so that they have them. Does that work?
Sounds great. Thank you so much for being willing to do that. So it's time for what we call our Good Guys moment that we like to do with our Good Guys programs. When we're in person, this is usually when we start having people stand up and be acknowledged. And hopefully this will work out that everyone will be unmuted, if not on screen, including but what we'd like to do at this point is to honor all of the diversity, equity, and inclusion champions that are here today. As I said, if we were in person, we asked you to stand and be recognized. Today, we're virtually recognizing you. And if you are a member of a diversity bar association, we applaud you. So we're going to clap. If you've written an article about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we also applaud you. So we're going to clap again.
Woo! Clap and cheer.
And if you've mentored a woman or a diverse man or a diverse person of diversity, a person of color, we applaud you.
Awesome.
If you've taken the first steps towards becoming a good guy by attending a Good Guys program today, which should be everybody on with us today, we applaud you as well. And together, all of us, we are what progress in diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like. And we thank all of you for joining us today. And now we get to the next portion of our program that we're all, I'm sure, very excited about, is our judicial panel. Our moderator today is going to be Judge Peter Reyes, Jr. of the Minnesota Court of Appeals, and I will let him, he's one of our premier good guys, and I'll let him introduce himself more fully, and as well as the panel introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolette. It's a pleasure to be here. The ABA Commission on Women in the Profession is delighted to be a co-sponsor of this Good Guys Judicial Edition program, along with the National Conference of Women's Bar Associations and the ABA Young Lawyers Division. By way of background, I'm Peter M. Reyes, Jr. I am a judge on the Minnesota Court of Appeals. I'm a past president of the Hispanic National Bar Association. And actually, I have written an article on advocating for women in the Juriste, which is the International Lawyers Association. And I am also very active in the American Bar Association, including in the House of Delegates, the Appellate Judges Conference on the Executive Committee, and as a commissioner on the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession, where I co-chair the Men in the Mix Committee, along with Katie Larkin Wong. And as noted earlier, we will be releasing a Men in the Mix report on March 1st, 2021, which can be found at ambar.org/women. That's ambar.org/women. I'm very honored, very honored to be moderating a panel of very distinguished members of the judiciary this afternoon. And I would like to give each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves, and we'll be going I'll be asking Captain John Stevens, and then Judge Timothy Kenny, and then Justice Goodwin Liu to introduce themselves. And I will start with Captain John Stevens.
Thank you very much, Judge Reyes, and thank you for allowing me to participate in the program. I'm very excited to be here. As Judge Reyes said, my name is John Stevens. I'm currently the Chief Trial Judge of the Navy and Marine Corps Trial Judiciary. So I've been in the Navy now for 24 years and a JAG officer for 16 years, and predominantly in criminal law, both prosecution and defense. This is my second tour on the bench, and I've been the Chief Judge for the last 7 months. So I'm really excited to participate in the discussion, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much, Captain Stevens. Judge Kenny.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel discussion. It's my privilege to be here. I am the Chief Judge of the Wayne County Circuit Court. We are the largest court of general jurisdiction in the state of Michigan. We have 58 judges on our bench. 32 of the 58 are women, and 21 are people of color. So we have diversity that is on our bench, and we serve a diverse community that we need to be responsive to as well. So thank you for the opportunity, and I too look forward to the discussion that we're going to have over the next few minutes.
Thank you, Judge Kenny. And last and definitely not least is Justice Liu.
Thank you, Judge Reyes. Such a pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be included on this panel. I'm Goodwin Liu. I'm a member of the California Supreme Court. We're a 7-member court, the Statewide Court of California. I've been in this position now, I guess now in my 10th year. And before that, I was a professor of constitutional law at UC Berkeley. A lot of my extracurricular energy is devoted to diversity in the legal profession. I do a lot of speaking and writing in that area. I'm currently working on a study with the American Bar Foundation about diversity in law clerk hiring in the federal courts. I'm also active in tracking enrollment trends in law school and recently published a paper about that. I just want to say that after Sheryl's fantastic presentation, I'm not really sure what more we're going to add. That was just about, that was a tour de force, and really set the stage nicely for this conversation.
Thank you very much, Justice Liu. And I couldn't agree more. That was actually my thought as well. It was such an excellent presentation, so much information there. But we are going to talk a little bit about our perspective from the judiciary. And Judge Kenny, you had actually mentioned the composition of your court and the diversity on your court. And I thought I might throw that out there as well. So we have 19 judges on the Minnesota Court of Appeals. We're an intermediary appellate court. Of those 19 judges, we actually have 12 that are women and 7 that are men. So we are a majority woman court. We have 3 people of color, including myself. I'm actually the first Latino to be on the Minnesota Court of Appeals. And Justice Liu, you had talked about diversity and inclusion, and I know, and I think a lot of people here probably know of all your activities with respect to diversity and equity and inclusion. I'd like to know, is there a personal story that you could share about why DE&I is so important to you?
Sure. I mean, much like Sheryl, I think it all begins with the personal. So I can think of a few influences in my life. There are many. First of all, it's just growing up in an immigrant family. I think that, you know, that which is an experience common to so many Americans, shapes one's worldview. My parents immigrated to this country in the late 60s from Taiwan. And it's just kind of a different vantage point to be outside of the culture, the mainstream culture, or to see it from the perspective of, you know, my parents, who at the time were not citizens, but then they eventually naturalized. And so the basic norms and sort of cultural mainstream of the country is not something that I took for granted. And it's something that you had to kind of work your way into. And so you have that kind of personal knowledge of kind of being on the outside looking in. A second influence is that there are not that many Asian Americans in the law, not until recently, at least. I think the most explosive period of growth was in the 80s and 90s into the early 2000s. But if you think about it, that's a pretty recent phenomenon. And so that's also part of the outsider looking in piece. And then, you know, later on in my life, I had the extreme great honor to clerk for the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's kind of funny being on this panel. I love the acronym, the good guys. I guess it's better than being a bad guy. But I would just say that, you know, I come to this very humbly, thinking that, you know, it's not that we, the 3 of us or the 4 of us, should be held up in any way. It reminds me of the phenomenon of, you know, when men do childcare, they get extraordinary credit, and that's so undeserved because it's just part of being a parent and being an equal partner. But Justice Ginsburg was always someone who, through her own litigation and personal life, deeply believed that men needed to be part of the conversation. Primarily because there's no way to change perceptions of women's roles in society without changing perceptions of men's. And she understood that duality, so well, both in her personal life and in her professional career. And so it's not really, kind of a matter of holding up people as good, or, I like the acronym, I'm not arguing against that, but it's that this is a necessity because both because of the gender equality paradigm that Justice Ginsburg so well articulated, but also because of the disproportionate reality, which Sheryl's slides showed us, which is that if men are not part of this conversation, nothing's ever going to change. So I think of it in those terms, and not so much as kind of, getting extra credit, for doing things that we all should be doing anyway.
Thank you very much, Justice Liu. Justice Kinney, your thoughts on that in terms of personal story that you'd be willing to share?
Sure. And once again, I think sometimes the personal stories are the most meaningful, and I think can propel us to take the kind of action that's appropriate. My personal interest in terms of diversity and inclusion has more to do with the inclusion end of it. And that arises out of the fact that between the time I was in the 8th grade until the time I finished my first year in college, I was in 5 different schools in 6 years. And if we all think back to what our high school experience was, certainly many of us recognize that high school can be fairly cliquish. And when you're the new person on the block, it really does, make you feel like the outsider, and it is sometimes awkward and difficult to try to fit in. When I think of the word inclusion in terms of the concept of diversity and inclusion, I think of the word belonging as being particularly appropriate, because we can think of it in this regard. Imagine that you work for a large law firm, and the firm decides to have a large summer picnic, and you get an invitation to come to the picnic. Well, you may come to the picnic and people may say hi to you when you walk in, but if no one shares the meal and the food with you, no one really talks with you and has any kind of conversation, are you going to leave that picnic really feeling like you belong? And when I heard Sheryl Axelrod talk about the notion of it's important to promote women and people of color who are in the legal profession and in law firms, it seems to me pretty clear they have to remain there in order to be promoted. And I think it really, to me, drives home the notion of make people feel that they belong, have them invited to participate. I know I'm dating myself. I'm older probably than the rest of the people on the panel. But years ago, there was a TV show called Cheers that a lot of people watched. And it was about a sports bar in Boston. And there was a very popular theme song to the TV show Cheers. And it had a very, I thought, significant line to the theme song. And that was, everybody wants to go someplace where everybody knows your name. And I think that applies to working in the legal profession as well. You need to feel that you belong.
Thank you very much, Judge Kinney. And we'll come back to that theme later. I think we can definitely have more discussion on that. Captain Stevens, your thoughts on diversity and inclusion efforts and your personal story?
So just like everybody else, it's always just been obvious to me how important diversity is. And the Navy hasn't been the most diverse entity that we have out there, right? But so when I first joined, for example, so I joined 24 years ago, my first ship didn't have any women on it. So I think that you'd think, oh, that has to have been a long time ago. And that's just within the last 24 years. But my second ship and thereon, I've had the opportunity to work with and for a bunch of amazing women leaders and have my peers both on the ship and then in the legal community. And so the one thing, kind of going to what Judge Kenny said, that always impressed me is we always seem to be doing better when we fostered kind of a spirit of teamwork, regardless of the size of our group. So when I was on the ship, we have different setups, divisions, and our offices were a little bit smaller. And then as I've gotten older, the size of the office gets a little bit bigger, but the goal for me remains the same, is to foster teamwork. And we have outstanding women with whom I've worked since then to help us continue to do that. So the thought of not including everybody and making them all feel like they are a part of the team is just something that's would be completely alien to me. And I saw in other aspects when that was not the general theme or the goal of the individual units, that they tended to fare poorly. So, and in the Navy, whether it's a law firm or in the Navy, or we're all trying to meet a certain mission. And so if everybody's pulling in the same direction, I've found in my experience that that's the best way to do that. And to do that, it's making sure that everybody feels included.
Thank you very much. And that actually leads to the next question. It's a slight variation on that story. And just so you know, by way of my background, I'm actually the grandson of migrant workers who came from Guadalajara, Mexico. And I grew up in Minnesota, a very, very white community, very Scandinavian community. So I stood out like a sore thumb. So in many ways, I've kind of lived the diversity side my entire life. But one thing I did want to note is I had a father who was alcoholic, but was also very, very abusive. And unfortunately, very, very abusive to my mother. And at one time he almost killed her. And I actually stopped him, pulled him off of her when he was choking her to death. And that had a very profound effect on my life and my view of things. She is an incredible woman. She was a single mother who raised myself and my two younger sisters and gave me the opportunity to be the first one in our family to go to college, in fact. And so, that was not only part of my story, but also my motivation to become more involved in diversity and inclusion efforts, and in particular with respect to women and women's issues. So I was curious as to what motivated you, or what steps have you taken that with respect to promoting, advocating, championing, mentoring women in your various fields. I'll start with you, Judge Kenny, for that.
Well, I'm very blessed to have an outstanding executive court administrator who has been instrumental in helping our court start our court strategic plan, which we have been using for the last number of years. And we have been very inclusive of not only judges, but court staff in formulating our strategic plan. We've set out our goals on a yearly basis, and it necessitates having subcommittees. And one of the things that the strategic plan has provided for us is the opportunity to be very inclusive of women and people of color and people who are new to the court and people who are veterans, to have the opportunity not only to have their voice heard and to be in a position of influence on important parts of how our court is going to go forward, but it also, I think, quite importantly, provides the opportunity, particularly for a number of our women judges, to have leadership roles and to demonstrate their ability to move forward and help move the court in a very positive direction. So that's one example that we have.
Thank you very much. And it's great to hear that is being done also in the judiciary. A lot of times people don't understand and realize that there are lots of activities that go on behind the scenes in the judiciary. Justice Liu, do you have thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I was thinking of many, many things, but I mean, one thing I'll just mention is at the interpersonal level, it's very important. When I was a law professor, you know, I taught hundreds and hundreds of students over the years. And this is kind of a true statement for anybody who's in any interpersonal setting, meetings, teaching, you know, whatever you're doing, is being kind of aware of the dynamics in the room and who's speaking and who's not speaking. And I would always be very attentive to that dynamic, especially because you have to go in with a background understanding that, you know, it doesn't take much observation to realize that men often dominate classrooms, they often dominate boardrooms, they often dominate most spaces that they're in, both kind of in terms of their voice, but also physically. I mean, if you look at some of the emotional intelligence literature about, you know, just how much physical space people kind of project and take up. So, you know, trying to equalize that, coming in with you have to begin with that baseline, and you have to think about, you know, consciously how you're going to monitor the dynamic and the equality dynamic in those settings. So when women students, you know, spoke up, I was very careful to hold up their comments. You know, just like Sheryl said, oftentimes they would need to be repeated in case someone didn't get the message. Being the person leading the class, you have to kind of affirm what is being said. This applies also to students of color who often feel spotlighted whenever they are speaking. And then I've often taken the additional step of just sending a short email to student after class, for example, if they sounded like they were a little worried how their comment came across, or if they didn't know they had done a good job or whatever. I'd pick up on that and just send them an email and say, really glad you said what you said today. That was an important contribution. And, you know, it's amazing when you think about in your own life, what are the memorable things, right, that have happened along the way. I can think of a lot of them, but many of them are very small. Like, you know, I remember I was a first year summer associate in a law firm, and a particular mentor in that law firm pulled me aside one day to comment on a very brief memo that I had written. It wasn't even that important, but he showed me like 3 things that I could have done better in the memo. Very, very small, very small. But I actually still remember them to this day. One was the distinction between that and which. Another was the distinction between while and although. The fact that I can remember these things, right, shows that not only did I, you know, benefit from the kind of technical advice he was giving, but the fact that he chose to do it was itself kind of an act of caring and an act of mentoring that I did not forget. And I think that's, you know, a lot of what this is. And so, you know, there are other systemic things in my own hiring, for example, in chambers. I hired, you know, a woman as my head of staff. I have fairly equal numbers, maybe even slightly favoring women in terms of law clerks. And, you know, there's all kinds of things that we need to do to monitor those kinds of data and make sure that we're being very fair. But I think at an even more intimate kind of interpersonal level, that's where a lot of the kind of confidence, you know, that people need to kind of progress and speak up and contribute. That's where that's developed.
Thank you very much, Justice Liu. Great insights there. I really like the examples you gave in particular. I may be giving you a call after this panel so I can figure out the distinction between that and which as well. But that's another conversation. Captain Stevens, your thoughts on this issue?
I agree wholeheartedly with everyone, what Justice Liu was saying on the interpersonal relationships. So, you know, we have the people who have worked for me are assigned. So, you know, limited impact in the hiring. I can help out with recruiting and that types of things, but more it's when people are working with me. And so I try to make it a point to go out into their space and talk to them about what they're doing. I found as we get older, sometimes if you ask someone to come into your office, it's as though you've been summoned. And so when I was on a ship, it was never that great to get summoned by the CO, right? And so, but in walking around the spaces, I've learned that you can find out a little bit more. People are more at ease when you go to them and talk to them. And I think as Justice Liu and Judge Kenny were saying, for me, it's just about not showing interest, but just letting them know that you're genuinely interested in what they're doing. And so to what Sheryl was saying about place and promote, that you can do that better when you know the people with whom you're working, right? So you know how to place somebody better, how to promote what they need, or more importantly, sometimes how to assist them when they need something if you know them better. And so I think there's a reticence sometimes. People are less likely to try to mentor someone with whom they can't relate. So you have to kind of go, I won't say force yourself, but try to forge relationships that way. And then that allows you to help people, move through the process. So in the Navy, whether it's if somebody wants to get go be a department head and leading as a litigator on one side or the other, now I have a better understanding of that. But I think it starts for me with people understanding that you're interested in their work, and then they're going to feel a little more, hopefully the goal is that they'll feel more comfortable talking to you about the other things, which can then better impact my ability to ensure that we are promoting and celebrating the people. And so as it pertains here, the women who have worked for me in the best possible way.
Thank you, Captain Stevens. And that's actually a good transition, I think, to the next topic I'd like to touch on. And it relates back to something that Sheryl had mentioned in her presentation about implicit bias and the importance of implicit bias training and knowing your own biases that you have. And we all have them in some way, shape, or form. And Captain Stevens, you talked about, more or less kind of meeting people in their space versus, summoning them to chambers or to your office. And one of the things that I'm curious about is, what do you think is holding other good guys back from getting more involved in D&I efforts, and in particular, with respect to advocating and promoting and championing women? Justice Liu, I was wondering if you could start us off on that topic.
Sure. I'll just say by way of prefacing that, I do think I agree with Captain Stevens and what Judge Kenney have said, that I think that the interpersonal dimensions are truly important. They ought to be complemented with an E, complemented with structural and organizational policy as well. So it's both. It's a both and. I think that in law, especially, it's both and, because some of what Sheryl presented suggested that a lot of the implicit bias literature is counseling that you need to have preset criteria and preset structures for processes related to hiring, promotion, and the like. I think that's true. And so you don't want to make up stuff as you go along, because that's where implicit bias comes in. But the problem in law is that if one of your criteria is how much business do you bring in, right? We all know that how much business you bring in is dependent on relationships, on networks, and on a lot of intangible factors. And so that's where the interpersonal dimensions really play a very, very significant role, even when you have objective criteria in advance. And so I guess I would say that there are a lot of things that people might want to think about. It's not your question about why aren't more men sort of involved. I don't think it's because I think of course there's some aspects of it that are just like resistance to change, and people want to hold on to whatever privileges that they have and whatnot. But I think actually the larger share of the problem is inattention. It's just inattention. It's not active resistance. It's just that people are busy and this is not a priority, and they don't immediately know what to do. And so there's just a kind of inattention to it. I think that the answer to that, if there is an answer, is actually things like this, which is that businesses and organizations have to make this issue truly front of mind, which then means creating metrics to hold people accountable, for paying attention to it. And I think that is happening. I mean, that's gradually happening. I'm reminded of the blowback, for example, that I saw recently this past year of a law firm that, announced its new class of partners, and there was not a single non-white face, among, 12 or whatever partners that they had recently promoted. And, they got a little blowback from that in the environment. And that's a signal, right? So that the next firm that is about to think about who they're promoting in their partner class is going to think twice about, wait a minute, does this really look like the firm that we want to create? Does this really match, the value statement that we say? Does this really, align with the rhetorical or other messaging that we give to younger associates about the value of diversity? And pausing to think about those things is one way, right, of making these things higher in their priority when real decisions have to happen. So I think that, it sounds like there's so much talk about diversity and inclusion these days. It's like, oh my gosh, can we stop already? But not really. We can't, because it has yet to penetrate, I think, into the truly sort of priority consciousness of many organizations, and thus, we suffer, I think, still from some inattention to these issues. Not really active resistance, though.
Well, and I think you raise a really good point about the need for it, and why diversity and inclusion fatigue. We can't give into that, particularly when you think about women. The legal profession is the least profession out there. And we just saw some of the numbers that Sheryl posted, but there are many other numbers that show how dismal the numbers are across the board. And so this is a real issue. And I don't think any of us can sit back and think that we're doing enough. But so coming back to that main question, and I want to move over to Captain Stevens, is what have you seen that might be holding other good guys back from getting more involved in DE&I efforts? And I think it's important for us to answer this question, because unless we identify what they are, we can't address those issues.
I think similar to what Justice Liu said, I think some of it is just time, unfortunately, right? And so it's not, there are some who are, as he said, just blatantly resisting. But I think a lot of it is the lack of attention that he speaks of. And some of that, I think some people associate, if I'm going to go, familiarize myself with the statistics, work on structural improvements, or take the time for the interpersonal relationships, we have less time to do everything else that I'm sure is super busy when you're in a law firm, or you're in the Navy, or you're practicing in court and preparing for your arguments. And so the question is, if everybody prioritized it, it wouldn't have fall so much on a few people, right? If everybody took the time to really become more familiar with this, then I think it wouldn't be that much additional time. I mean, certainly, and then the more you make it routine. So when I was talking about walking around, I think it's another thing, if to the extent that you can make it routine, then it's just what people do. And so then I think then you work other issues around. And, now at the last year with the pandemic and people having to worry about childcare and everything else that goes attendant, and just all the other stressors that they've had, we have probably even less time. So these, I would imagine that similar to what Justice Liu said about how it seems that we discuss this a lot, but I think people hear about it for an hour at work, and then they go home and they think about everything else that they have going on. So I think trying to make, have all of our organizations just continue to prioritize it in a way that doesn't become off-putting, unfortunately, for some, but just so people are aware of it. And then, for lack of a better term, get people to pitch in that way, and just prioritize. It's important. So everybody needs to figure out a way to shuffle their time a bit to make sure that it's important.
Thank you very much, Captain Stevens. Judge Kinney, your thoughts on this topic?
I would agree with what's just been mentioned, that I think much of it is a lack of involvement, because many people are just busy. They're busy with their own work, they're busy with their own families, and that sort of, has them take their eye off the ball about how important it is. But I'd like to add just maybe an additional element here. And I think whether it's the leadership in a law firm, or whether it's the leadership in the court, or maybe in the military, I think that leaders have to talk about this. They have to talk about it a great deal. I think it needs to be made important because the leaders say it's important. And I think that's the first step toward making it become part of either the firm's or the court's culture. That's my take.
Thank you very much. And that leads actually to the next question I have for all of you, and that's the why question. And I think you actually touched on it a little bit, Judge Kinney, of why do more male leaders need to get involved with DE&I efforts? Actually, Judge Kinney, if you want to, well, let's go Justice Liu. He's off mute, so why don't you go ahead?
Well, I think I'm going to pick up on something that Captain Stevens said, which is that, you know, we should have said at the outset that one of the premises for the good guys idea is also surely the fact that too much of this work falls on women and people of color presently. This is often referred to as the tax, the diversity tax, right, that women and people of color pay because they're brought into organizations, but then they're the ones who are serving on the equity inclusion committees. They're the ones who are doing the hard work of promoting environment. They're the ones who are sort of in the business of kind of educating other people about the concerns that arise. And I think this is, you know, obviously misaligned and imbalanced. And so a wider spread of that work, as Captain Stevens was alluding to, is definitely necessary. And in order to accomplish that, I think you organizationally have to think about aligning incentives and rewards appropriately. Sheryl alluded to this in her presentation, which is that you have to make diversity work something that is valued and in many organizations monetarily rewarded. It can't be viewed as something that's extra or nice to have, but not essential. It has to be something that when people put in hours into doing this work, that it counts towards something for which they are compensated and in fact rewarded and held up for. So I think that's really important. That's a very important piece. And, you know, it's common also, I think we see in the corporate world that Coca-Cola, for example, just issued a big statement about this last month in terms of demanding more diversity in the law firms that it works with. And you know, there's been a mixed record, I think, of big corporations making these kinds of demands. Sometimes they have more teeth than others, but you know, that I think is one of the keys to changing the equation, is that the clients who really have the deeper pockets, the stronger the statement they make, the more, you know, rigorous the demands that they make, and where it hits, you know, lawyers in terms of the bottom line. That's where you're going to get people motivated to see this as essential to how they go about their work, and not just something that's extra that you can, in essence, offload right onto the people who are most affected in a disadvantaging way, actually, by these issues. So we have to change that balance through a set of aligned incentives and rewards.
Thank you, Justice Liu. Judge Kinney, so why do more male leaders need to get involved with these diversity and inclusion efforts?
Well, I think from a judicial perspective, it just makes our court stronger. The fact that we have more participation from different viewpoints just brings out better ideas and just makes us a much stronger court. As I mentioned to you, we are in a circumstance in our court where the majority of the judges are women. And I think that for us, the notion of the more inclusive we are, the more that the men become involved. I think that it just brings more people along in terms of participating and helping us get to be a stronger court.
Thank you. And Captain Stevens, I love this panel. We have such a great panel of people from very different backgrounds, and interested in your thoughts, not only judicial, but also military, in terms of why do we need more male leaders involved in diversity inclusion efforts?
I think just from the statistical analysis, just briefly looking at what Sheryl provided, I mean, right now, the fact is from her statistics that it's predominantly men who are in charge. So if the men aren't driving the change, then who will? So just from a number standpoint, it starts there, right? And I think having some people who maybe, I don't know if it takes that to set an example or just kind of what we were getting to before, just keep bringing the issue to the fore so that people are mindful that it's there. I think sometimes people put it aside, but simple issue is if men don't, then it'll be harder. It goes back to what Justice Liu was saying. Too many people from, the affected groups are the one driving all the change. That's an uphill battle. That leads to what 2181, as Sheryl said in her slide. So if we can drive it from down, and so the military, we don't have the same bottom line money aspect, right? We're trying to serve the people, and similar kind of, litigation, public defender and state's attorney's offices and those types of things. But what we do see is if you keep flattening, as one of Sheryl's diagrams showed, which was, as you get to the more senior levels, there are fewer women, fewer people of color. Who's going to want to join? I mean, and then we get to the point where if people don't see a path for them to continue to progress in an organization, it seems to me natural that they may be less inclined to want to remain a part of that organization, which then leads us to the groupthink challenges and missing out on just a diversity of thought, as not just on other metrics.
Wonderful insights from all of you, Captain Stevens. Your point is, I think, well taken. If you don't see others that look like you in the room, it can feel very uncomfortable. And I think we've all seen and read stories of women being the first walking into the boardroom to partner, et cetera, and that's certainly something that needs to be changed. Justice Liu, you actually had touched on something that reminded me of a conversation I had with a white male colleague of mine who had asked me why I was so involved in DE&I efforts. And as you noted, oftentimes being a person of color, you get tagged for those and diversity committees, et cetera. And he and I had a very frank conversation. And at one point he said, your diversity efforts seem very self-serving. And I was a little taken back by that, to be honest, at first. But fortunately, he and I are good friends. And after I cooled down and thought, let my anger subside about, wait a minute, but I'm trying to do this to help others. I thought he had actually a very, very good point, that I can see how the efforts of somebody who, let's say, is Latino, advocating for other Latinos can be seen as self-serving. But that also emphasized to me when we had a follow-up conversation, I told him, I said, well, you know what? That's why we need your voice at the table as a white male. And that's why I think those men, those of us who are male, need to add our voice to the table to advocate for women, because that catches other people's attention. It's not seen as self-serving at all because it's not necessarily a direct benefit to us. So with that in mind, I wanted to turn, because this is actually the Good Guys Judicial edition, to ask each of you, and I'll start with you, Justice Liu, about what can those of us in the judiciary do to have an impact on DE&I efforts and advocate for women?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I've been at this for 10 years on the bench now, and I must say that I've always understood, of course, that judges are very respected in our society. But having put on the robe myself, I came to understand to a degree, I think, that I did not obviously have any firsthand appreciation of, just how important, I guess, the role is, that the legal profession really does pay attention to judges and takes its cues in many ways from what the judiciary thinks is important. And so one of the things that judges, I think, can do is, first of all, just kind of realizing that much of our day work, at least for me, being an appellate judge, is solitary, and I'm buried in the books, and I'm writing, I'm reading. You're smiling, Judge Reyes, you know what this is like. And it's not a very outward facing kind of role, honestly. It's very kind of egg-headed and introspective. But the fact is that from the external point of view, people really do watch us and think about like what it is that we are messaging. And so we ought to take quite seriously the really, it's the privilege that's been given to us, but it's also a power as well that we have at our disposal because of our office, the prestige that we can bring, to this and visibility to this set of issues. And so that almost, in my mind, makes it imperative that we do so because we have the ability to do so. It's a responsibility that we exercise it. So I don't know. I don't expect everyone to be riding the diversity panel circuit perhaps as much as this current group does. But I think everyone has something to contribute to this discussion and not to be afraid of it and to embrace it. Sometimes just to confess like that it's challenging and we don't have all the answers, but that it's important to us and it's a work in progress and we're all thinking about it. Even saying that much, I think, is super important if everyone can participate in saying it. So I think judges, just by virtue of that, have a really big role. There are also smaller things, by the way. I mean, courtroom dynamics. I'm reminded of, there's a colleague I have in the Northern District of California on the federal bench. She had a big trial one day, a whole bunch of lawyers actually hearing. And then one day she said there's like 24 lawyers in this courtroom. And she says, is there not a single woman, that any of your law firms have that can argue a motion, in this court? And the next day there were, women at the podium magically. Well, look, I mean, how many interactions like that does it take, right, to get the message across? And judges are in a unique position, right, to kind of create that change, which that judge did in a very kind of microcosmic and yet important way. So there's numerous things like that, that can happen. So both writ small and writ large, I think judges have a big role to play.
Thank you very much, Justice Liu. Great examples. And we have just a few more minutes, and I do want to have some time to have some comments on takeaways. Captain Stevens, do you have thoughts in terms of what we can do from the judiciary?
I think just continue to kind of spur interest with all the litigants who come before us, right? So specifically with as far as the promoting or acknowledging when people do things well, or, I imagine I'm like a lot of us. It is introspective, but I love reading the cases and talking about them. And that's been the hardest thing about when I toggle back and forth to be a judge. The group of people with whom I can speak is much smaller now, right? So, but you can talk after a case and provide feedback with everybody. And, some judges are reticent, I think, to do that. There are some risks, but I don't think you have to speak specifically about cases or how you get in your deliberations, but just talk more about the process. And I think if people can see our interest and we can kind of point out the things that they did well, and then also the constructive criticism that Justice Liu still remembers that he received, I think people value that sometimes even more. So it shows like, oh, you're not just complimenting me because you have to, you're actually trying to let me improve as an attorney. I think if we can do that, it will, again, engender just kind of an excitement about the law and being in court and show that it's not such a scary place to be in there. And I think for everybody that helps. So the more that we can show interest in what they're doing, I think that helps. And again, to the point where we have female litigants who are doing that, to point out the things that they're doing well and how they can improve. I think that's something that we can do from the bench.
Thank you, Captain Stevens. Judge Kinney, your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Picking up just briefly on what Justice Liu mentioned about the sort of the importance or the power of being a judge. One of the things that I think is a very pleasant surprise that you find that when you are a judge, that if you call other judges, but specifically also if you call other lawyers, actually they answer the phone, they'll take your call. And interestingly enough, if you decide you want to call a meeting, if you want to talk about issues of diversity and inclusion, people will come. And I find that particularly is true when you're the chief judge. So I mention that just as an aside to indicate that in a couple of weeks, our court is beginning the first of a series of diversity and inclusion panel discussions. And we're starting out talking about generational diversity and how judges deal with that particular issue. But as I said, I think that we shouldn't hesitate to use the privilege that we have as judges to marshal the folks to come together on issues as important as this.
Thank you. And we're just out of time, just about out of time. So now we've got the lightning round of what's at least one manageable concrete step that you would recommend that men take to advocate for women. Captain Stevens, I'll start with you.
For me, I think initially, again, go out and put yourself out in a position where you can mentor some additional people. I think in order to advocate for somebody, you have to understand what it is they need. And again, it goes back to, and I don't mean to repeat myself, but I don't know how you can really understand what somebody needs unless you have actually gotten to know them a little bit. So for me, I think the first thing I would encourage is trying to get out of the office and go walk down and introduce yourself, or, you know, make it a point to establish a relationship with someone perhaps that you didn't. And just, I think from there, you can kind of build steps from there. There's the institutional piece that Justice Liu discusses, so being involved in that. But to specifically advocate for, you know, a woman in my office, I would have to, I think, I wouldn't presume to know what the issues were until I got to know her a little bit and could address that better, I think.
Thank you. Judge Kinney.
I would say a specific thing is once we come out of this pandemic, when there are networking events, bring someone along with you and introduce them, particularly if you are a person of influence or someone in a position of power. Introduce that individual to other individuals that you think that they ought to know, and brag on them a little bit while you're at it.
Great suggestion. And finally, Justice Liu.
Those are great ideas. The institutional organizational piece is too much to talk about in 1 minute, but I love just getting like little, you know, kind of bite-sized ideas. Here's one that a law firm partner shared with me on a panel like this. She's Asian American at a big firm, and she said that one of the things that was really helpful to her was that there's a senior partner at her firm, just, you know, actually a white guy who's, you know, big guy, you know, big, not stature wise, not a 6'2", you know, CEO, but someone who has stature in the legal community. And what they have is they have a mentoring relationship where she related that they have what's called a mentoring minute, which means that she can call him at any time, any day. He will stop whatever he is doing to answer a question that she has. And he can do it directly and in a minute for any piece of advice, any kind of small thing, or, you know, whatever that comes up. And it's like an always available kind of thing. I really like that idea, mentoring minute, which kind of means that it doesn't take a lot actually to make a difference in someone's life. And again, the small stuff really counts. It's what people remember. And if you can, you know, go back to your own mentoring relationships and think about establishing that kind of idea with the people who you're bringing along, I think they would really welcome it. And putting it into practice would, I think, change people's lives, I think, for the better.
Thank you all so much. I really wish we had more time because I feel like we're just getting going on this topic, but we're going to be turning over for a Q&A session. I just wanted to first and foremost thank each and every one of you for taking the time and for your efforts as good guys to promote and advocate and champion women. It's something that we need to continue to do. So thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful discussion. A lot of positive feedback. Everybody's really appreciating what you've all shared today. I love the mentoring minute. That's really cool. And plus you remember it, right? Those things that, I don't know, the short and sweet, and there's some kind of memorable part to it, you know, we really remember. So thank you, all of you. So we do have some questions. I don't think we'll probably get to all, but we'll do our best. One question is, have you heard of the 21-day racial equity challenge that some courts have undertaken? And are any of your court systems doing that challenge? Anybody? Nope. Okay, well, we need
Yes,
to know more about that.
Yes, we have in our court, yes.
Oh, awesome. So, so any others? Have any others done it besides Wayne County? That's really interesting.
We have not in the Navy.
Judge Kenny, did you? Yeah, Judge Kenny, did you want to say anything more about the racial equity challenge?
Well, it was distributed to our staff for them to examine and to consider undertaking. I mean, we haven't been going around and collecting their responses or checking things as they've completed them, but I think it's another example of just putting something on people's radar so that they start thinking about it, and not only thinking about it, but taking action.
Okay, another question that we had deals with the Me Too movement and how the Me Too movement has resulted in some men, really shying away from getting involved with, in particular, gender issues. So I guess do our good guys on the panel have any suggestions for other good guys about how to kind of navigate that territory?
Just wanted to add that if you are going to mentor, for instance, men, and you're going to take them out to dinner and take them on the golf course and those kinds of things, don't do it if you're not going to do that equally with women. So that's, I think absolutely everything he said, be professional, act professional, and give women every opportunity that you're giving men, or don't give them to men, because it's not fair if you're excluding us from them.
I think that's a great comment. If I may add one suggestion, lay the groundwork beforehand. So for instance, my clerks. So 2/3 of my clerks have been female. 40% have been diverse, of all different types of diversity. And one of the things that I do when I first meet with my clerks is to let them know, this is a safe space. If I say something that is inappropriate or it comes off as inoffensive, please let me know, especially if it's something that I do or say that's unintentional. But I let them know right from the get-go that they have the ability to call me on the carpet for anything I do or say.
I would say that one thing that we've done, we have it in our military vernacular, we use a lot of acronyms, right? So we call it a CDB, which is a Career Development Board. And so one way, I agree that we shouldn't be in the position where we have to be concerned, just as Justice Liu and Judge Reyes said, but I think in reality, some people are still in that position. So then if we accept that that is an issue in some places, one way that you could potentially work around it is, again, setting up a routine where for junior officers, we would bring them in when they've been with us for 6 to 7 months and kind of go over their record and have them sit down, not just with me, but with kind of the senior leadership, which would typically include senior women in the office, and then kind of mentor them as a group. And so that might be one way to at least kind of start the process, is to, if you routinely have it as kind of a group setting, then it's not odd when you choose to do it that way. And then in the hopes that you can then transition in a, kind of in a tiered way to get to where you can do more, people are more comfortable with one-on-one. Because, some people used to say in the Navy, right? I would hear in the Navy, if you had to mentor someone, you'd always have to leave a door open, or you'd always have to have a witness. That seems very adversarial almost. So, but what I found is having a group where everybody is aligned to try to serve the person with whom we're speaking, serve their interests, then it's not an odd thing. Then they actually get more feedback from a wider group of people. So you're kind of serving both ends.
Fabulous. Great advice. I'm thinking back to, there was a client back in the day who really changed everything for me. It was an older gentleman. He thought I was just the greatest litigator. I was young and, new, but I think he saw potential, and he sent me cases, and it really changed everything. But the interesting thing is that years later, I heard that people assumed we were having an affair. It's like, oh my gosh, really? And so what can you do about that? You can't really control all these things. You can't, I guess you need to be kind of aware of, I don't know, the perceptions that people might have and do what you can to, give an impression that, I don't know, stuff like that isn't really going on. But I do feel there's an element that you just have no control over, which is a different thing than a gentleman being accused of, harassing or, some kind of sexual misconduct. So there's a lot of variables we just can't control. And I think we just all have to kind of set that aside and do our best. Let's see, one of the other questions is, do you have any tips for what women can do when we're perceived as being angry, when we're just maybe passionate? Anybody have thoughts on that? It's kind of a tough one. I know Sheryl will back this up. I think that what gentlemen can do is speak up and say, well, obviously, so-and-so is passionate about this. And maybe kind of try to perceive it as if it were a gentleman talking. And, is that the kind of comment that we would make if it were a gentleman talking, that, you seem angry? And maybe we would sometimes. I'm not sure, because, sometimes I get angry at opposing counsel, and that's appropriate. That's appropriate. That's fine. Do any of the guys have any ideas?
I would
Go ahead, please. Well, I think that this goes to Cheryl's middle letter in the PEP, the echo portion. I think the Pantene ad, of course, is very suggestive of how kind of the same phenomenon, if done by different genders, how it's differently perceived. I'll just give you a kind of one kind of practice that I have from teaching, which is that, when I conduct class in a big class or a small class, I usually like to have a lot of discussion among the students, but that, of course, has to make you very attuned to background inequalities in terms of people's comfort level of speaking up in class. And I have a regular practice of just kind of restating what people say. And students often appreciate this because they often say, oh, you made my point sound better than, what I said. And students always like it when the professor does that. That's not really true in the sense that what they have is actually a good idea. But in restating it, I do this whether or not the point is, well stated or not well stated, so that for the students, who are raising an issue that may become about controversial things. So of course, if you teach a subject like constitutional law, you're going to come across many controversial things, that I can rephrase and rechannel something that someone says in a slightly less, I can deflect a little bit. I can kind of take a little bit of the passion part out of it and help the merits of the point kind of come through. But I'm not negating the passion either, because I think it's important also that people see that, when there are some things that are important to people, and we shouldn't be dismissive, of people's points of view and dismissive of how passionately those views are held, because that may temper, I think, the way that someone with an opposing view might want to respond to it. And so I try to walk a fine line, but also be a point of deflection. Another way of doing it, this is mostly about classroom, and I'm not quite sure how this would translate to court settings, but is that if you have a particularly difficult matter that needs to be discussed, role playing is often a good way, so that people who are going to hold passionately or argue for passionately held views don't have to necessarily own them in the first person, right? So they can state certain things as if they were a lawyer for a client, right, who is arguing for a certain thing. That's actually a good lesson for lawyers generally, is that the reason we have lawyers in part is because, the people who lawyers represent often are too emotionally invested, right, to necessarily say all the things that they want to say in the way that they feel might be best for it to be heard by a neutral party. And that's where a lawyer comes in. So, you know, when you're dealing with students or and whatnot, these are some devices, you know, to kind of address some of the emotions that surround how we talk.
Wonderful. The one we're not getting to is how can we ensure that women don't get sidelined when, you know, all women and diverse men don't get sidelined when they become champions for these issues. And that's probably another tough one that we could talk about, you know, for a full presentation, because it is kind of unfair that, like, I think it was Judge Reyes, you were saying that you were seen as being kind of self-interested for being engaged in these issues. So that, I'm afraid, is going to have to be a topic for another day. Feel free to come on to NCWBA's Facebook page. Maybe we can chat there about it as well. And I think Nicolette is going to close it up for us.
Thank you, Teresa. Let me start by first thanking all of our distinguished panelists for being with us today. Your presentations were wonderful. Your comments were very insightful, and I enjoyed it very much, as I'm sure all of our attendees did as well. I'd also like to thank all of our attendees for being here with us tonight from across various time zones. And I hope you've enjoyed the program. Few housekeeping items. I did want to mention, as part of this, our mid-year programming, we had a program yesterday, program today. All of our programming this year for mid-year has been dedicated to a former board member who recently passed away unexpectedly, Monica Parham, who was a champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, spoke on it. And it was just a very valued former member of our board that we do want to acknowledge and recognize. There is going to be, for those who are attending who may have known her, there is a memorial that's going to be held virtually for her on Friday, March 19th at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can contact info@ncwba.org to get the specific information and link for registering for that if you want to attend. We also have upcoming quarterly member organization meetings coming up on March 16th and 17th, and those details will be sent out through our regular channels. And our next webinar is on March 22nd. And it's open to everyone. These are free webinars that we do more or less monthly. This is the pandemic's impact on women in the workplace with speakers Emily Litzinger and I don't know if it's Kira or Syra Chowdhury. So I wanted to mention those. Also, we have, I want to encourage everybody to check out our toolkits for Good Guys at goodguysinlaw.com. We have a lot of information on how to do your own Good Guys program. Especially want to encourage you to check out the Monday morning to-do list and take a look at it and implement that in your own organizations or firms or whatever sphere that you're in. And I'd also encourage you, just part of the reason for this program and why we founded these programs is that we want to bring men into the conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace. Obviously, our focus is on women and gender, but we do these programs a few times throughout the year. We encourage our member organizations to hold programs. What I want to encourage all of the attendees to do, and as well as our panelists, who I'm sure do this anyway, is to look out for these programs or even try to organize a program and invite the men to be in the audience. We want the men in the audience. We want them to hear this. We want them to engage in this conversation. And that's what we're working towards, is to have everybody equally engaged in talking about this and understanding, as our panel does and as our attendees here do, is that why diversity, equity, inclusion is important from the bottom to the top for everyone in all spheres. Makes for a better, not just better profitability, it makes better for society, and makes it better for all of us. Did I cover everything, Teresa?
Yes, yes. Contact us if you want to do a Good Guys program. We would love to help you.
Yes, and we
Thanks
will
again
help
to
you if you
everybody
do want
today.
hold one. And if there's any questions you think of later, please feel free to contact us. And if you, I'm sorry, we did not have time for any kind of a networking breakout rooms or things like that. But if you're interested in connecting with any of our speakers, please contact us at info@nclbba.org, and we will do our best to do that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you.